Welcome back. We talked a lot about bonds. Bonds on the global market is what we call the international bond marketplace. Most of those bonds that we talked about are sold through banks and stockbrokers, oftentimes sold through banks and stockbrokers to the public or to other corporations in order to raise money for the firm and make money for those corporations. When a corporation buys bonds of another firm, they're helping that firm out, but they're also helping themselves out because when the bonds come to maturity, they have more money than what they started with when they loaned it. Understand the difference between foreign bonds. They are sold outside the bond issuer's country and denominated in that currency, or euro bonds, which are sold outside the bond issuer's home country and denominated in its own currency. Make sure you understand the difference between those two. When you look down there, you can see that there are examples of both. So intercorporate financing is another way of raising money in a multinational firms. What they're doing is they're obtaining funds from subsidiaries or affiliates. Some countries and some affiliates, some subsidiaries within an MNE are cash rich while others are cash poor. Oftentimes, some people with their day-to-day operations, they're bringing in cash every day. Other MNEs have subsidiaries that don't bring in cash for, say, a long time. Look at Boeing. Boeing might sell a contract for 100 airplanes, and they don't have cash coming in for a long time, whereas other subsidiaries of Boeing might have everyday cash coming in. When that happens, oftentimes people will borrow within the country. It has usually little effect on the balance sheets because they're transferred, but it also minimizes the costs of the MNE because when they pay back interest, they're paying it back to themselves. So it's actually like borrowing money from yourself. When you pay back the interest, you're paying it back to yourself. And that's what happens within the intercorporate financing activities that go on in the world marketplace. The other task is managers need to understand working capital and cash flow management. They need to know how much cash to have on hand to meet day-to-day payroll and to meet day-to-day expenses, but also need to have some cash invested in other things like foreign direct investment, etc. So cash flow management ensures cash is available when needed, but also that cash is available for long-term projects also. Cash is usually generated from day-to-day operations. When it's not generated from day-to-day operations, like selling things, etc., when it's not generated from day-to-day operations, then they need to borrow or somehow find other sources of cash or funding. Capital budgeting is just that. It's budgeting for long-term projects, budgeting for what we would call foreign direct investment, budgeting for capital improvements within the organization. So they use a net present value, and they use the net present value on projects to try to determine how much it's going to cost and how much it's going to pay back. And all of that is capital budgeting. Internationally, it's a little bit more complicated than it is domestically, because when you use net present value, you've got to know what currency you're using and whether that currency is going to go up or down over the value of the capital budget. This is a tough one. There is all kinds of things with regards to currency risk management. Currency risk management means that you are doing business in another currency, and that currency has some risk to it or exposure to it. For instance, let's talk about the Mexican peso. If you're doing business in Mexico and you're building infrastructure in Mexico, the infrastructure might take 5 years. You look at what the currency rate is between us and Mexico now, you know that it's not going to be the same in 5 years. If the Mexican peso gets stronger, then you do great. If it gets weaker, well, then you lose money. So we have to hedge we have to reduce our exposure to make sure that when we do business in foreign countries, we're not taking a bath on the exchange rate. So there's a couple of terminology, specialized terminology in currency trading and also in hedging. The first one is spot rate and forward rate. You can read it there. Spot rate is based on today, and forward rate is you peg it based on a forward rate. So for instance, what you might want to do is say, okay, in 5 years when this is done, the peso is going to be 25 to 1 for the dollar. So even if it today is at 20 to 1, you can peg it for it to be 25 to 1 in the future or whatever it might be. Hedgers seek to minimize the risk of exchange rate fluctuation by hedging using different, and we're going to talk about different ways of hedging in just a minute. They buy forward or something like that. Speculators are those that speculate in currency valuations over the time. A speculator might say, I think that the euro, right now the euro costs $1.09, $1.09. If you think that the euro is going to go up and in the future and it's going to cost $1.50, so now you buy a whole bunch of euros at $1.09 and you sell it later at the $1.50 that you think it's going up. That's a speculator. You can have speculators on stocks. You can have also speculators on currency exchange. Exchange rates typically respond rapidly to economic information. This coronavirus that's going on right now has been killing, absolutely killing a lot of different exchange rates, especially in China, because China took the blunt of it and had so many cases. So far, we've been able to somewhat contain it here in the United States, and we haven't taken as hard a hit as China. But those are the type of things that are going to have an effect on forward exchange rates. So here's some hedging instruments. You don't really need to understand these. You just need to know the definition. You don't need to understand them. I'm not expecting you guys to be hedge managers or hedge experts, but I do need you to understand what a foreign contract is, what a futures contract is, what a currency option is, and what a currency swap is. It is absolutely critical that you guys know the definitions of them. Not how to use them, but just really the definitions. Hedging and minimizing currency risk is a very difficult task. It's very difficult for anybody to do, but there are ways in the international market in which to do it. And people get paid a whole bunch of money being able to hedge currency risk or to reduce currency risk for an MNE. And there's a whole bunch of international financiers and international lawyers that do just that. The last task is managing international accounting and tax practices. For you accountants out there, you understand that developing an accounting system is really the most important. And you might develop different accounting systems for different countries, for different currencies. There's all kinds of approaches to value inventory, to value depreciation, to do all of those types of things. So setting up an accounting system that is beneficial for the MNE based on the specific country in which they are doing business is absolutely critical, especially when you have some parts of the MNE that might be doing day-to-day operations and selling things and bringing in cash, and other parts of the MNE that are only R&D and have R&D expenditures. So you might have a think tank someplace in Vienna, and then an MNE might have in London a day-to-day operations which is raising cash. So you've got to set up two different accounting firms, accounting systems for those, because they're different businesses, even though they're under the same MNE. If you look at somebody like 3M, 3M has huge R&D expenditures all over the world where they're coming out with new products and new things and new consumer types of inventions, but they're also selling on a day-to-day basis and bringing in revenue. So they have different accounting systems for different people. Balance sheets, income statements vary hugely based on the language. The other thing that managerial accountants and especially global accountants have to do is they have to understand the accounting tax laws in each one of those countries. The tax laws in the United States might be different from the tax laws in, say, China or the tax laws in Europe. And the tax laws in Europe might be different than those tax laws in Australia or wherever you need to do business with. So they need to have a good handle on the tax laws. And then finally, transparency in financial reporting is critical. We know that transparency in financial reporting is absolutely critical here in the United States, especially for public companies. The more transparent the nation's accounting system is, the more the investors can look and be comfortable, and actually not only be comfortable, more investors can invest within it. It's easier to raise money through bonds. It's easier to sell stock when you have a transparent accounting system, when people can take a look at your books to see that you're profitable, etc. When they aren't transparent, when they're cooking their books, etc., then it's very difficult for people to understand why they would want to invest, and they wouldn't invest in there. Take a look at what happened to WorldCom or Enron or something like that. Accounting systems in many emerging markets, like those in Africa and some of those in South America, have very low transparency. Because they have very low transparency, they have very little foreign direct investment. Because they have little foreign direct investments, that's why they're continuing to develop and continue to be not an advanced economic system. That is going to do it for managerial accounting, or excuse me, I guess I should say global accounting and global financial management. With that being said, we'll be back with Chapter 11 soon.